What's up, guys? Thank you for watching this podcast. And today we're going to be talking about foster care. And my guest today, he's been a chaplain with the Assemblies of God, U.S. Missions, and he is a Compicare rep with Compact Family Services. And he is a good friend of my churches, and we support him and do a lot of things. So my guest today is Ted Stackpole. Ted, thank you for coming on the show today.
Great. Thanks for having me here today.
Awesome. Why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about who you are and kind of what got you into all this kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I am a father of 11 children.
Oh, wow.
And so to back up a little bit, I usually tell the story, when my wife and I first got married, I wanted one child. One seems super easy.
Yes.
And my wife wanted 4 children. And so like every young couple does, we compromised and we had 5 children.
Oh, wow.
Together.
That's more than what she wanted.
So 2013, the church I was pastoring at the time, there was a group of individuals really had a heart for adoption. They had adopted some children internationally, and they come to me and asked about maybe starting a small group or something to do with adoption in the church. This was right prior to 2013, and so we kind of launched out and started a small group for people that had interest in adoption. But when 2013 rolled around, they were offering foster care classes in Putnam County, and I don't believe they'd had done that prior to that. You had to drive to Volusia County to take the classes. So there was a group of people in the church that said, "Hey, we're interested in fostering," and so my wife and I said, "Well, let's we'll be supportive and we'll take the classes with you."
Yeah.
We heard the certificate was good for 5 years, so we didn't feel like we were obligated to do anything. And so we took the class. It was January of 2013, and towards the end of that year, Pandora's box really opened up nationally because of the opioid crisis.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of children that were coming into care, and we just started getting calls. All of us were getting phone calls. And we only knew one word at that point, and that was the word yes. And so at some point, we were told when we started fostering that, you couldn't have more than 5 children under 18 in your home, including your own. But by the time we got into 2014, the end of 2014, we were looking at, we had 8, 10, and then 11 kids in our house at the same time, all under 18 years old.
Wow.
And their cases were pretty long, and so as we started seeing some of the cases closed out, and that would mean either a parent's rights are terminated or maybe a parent had surrendered their rights, we had these children that had been with us for some of them 1, 2, 3 years, and we felt like that they deserved to have a forever family, and we wanted to give them that gift of adoption through our family.
Wow,
so
that's awesome.
So we had about 12 long-term placements, and 6 of those needed adoption, and so we've adopted 6 children since 2013, and so we still have 8 children at home that are under the age of 13, from 2 to 13 years old, and we have continued to be involved in foster care, and now I'd like to say that foster care, it found us. We didn't find it, and it literally has shifted through an act of God the direction we're on in our life into full-time U.S. Missions chaplaincy into the foster care community at large now.
And it's funny that you say that, because typically when God calls you to something, that's typically how God calls you. Sometimes it's a direct call and you feel it, and sometimes it's just like it just falls right in your lap.
Yeah, so leaving the church was a big deal for us, and April 1st, 2018 was our last Sunday at the church we'd been at for 22 years.
So it hasn't really been that long since you've been out.
No, but it was October 18th, 2017. We just hired a new children's pastor in the church. He was ministering in a Wednesday night service, and he just said something that caught my attention, and apparently the Holy Spirit used it that evening, and he just said, God brought us to Palatka because he had a better plan for us. And I felt the Holy Spirit just speak to me and say, I don't have a better plan for you. And I'm just kind of sitting in the pew thinking, what does this mean? And I wouldn't say that I've had many of these conversations with God over my life period, but I just was like, what does that mean? And then I felt the Holy Spirit just quicken to me and say, I have a new plan for you. And instantaneously I knew that in 2018 we'd be transitioning out of pastoral ministry to do something involved with foster and adoption. And so it was at
That's
that
awesome.
point that we just had to begin to seek God and say, what is it? Because I felt like Abraham. I'm leaving and going somewhere, but I have no idea,
where
what
you're
it
going.
is.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it's sometimes God's call is like that, and you just follow, even though you don't know where that road is going to lead.
Yeah.
And usually when you do, it's a lot better than what you could ever expect. And that's kind of how my wife and I ended up here. Is we didn't know where we were going to end up. This is the most rural area we've ever lived in. This is how we discussed a little bit earlier. And so sometimes you just got to follow where God leads, and he opens these doors that you never expected. And so kind of tell our listeners, what is Compicare? What is Compicare, and how did you directly get involved with it? I know there was kind of a trail there leading you that direction.
Yeah, so to back up to when these families went through the classes and began to foster, we realized immediately that this is the hardest and most difficult thing that any of us had ever done in our life. And the more I began to look into it, the more I began to realize statistically, some places in our nation, 30 to 50% of foster families close within 1 year or their first placement.
Oh,
so you're talking about a huge turnover rate, which is, creates problems with the quality of homes, the stability for the children, the number of children that are in homes. So it's a huge issue there. So we kind of discovered this, and I began to reach out to some people as I met them and say, what can we do about, I don't want to be a statistic. I don't want, and we learned of a concept that was being practiced now and is evidence based, and it's called wraparound. And so it was a term that I hadn't heard before, and I was educated on that. It was the idea of that other people would come around and wrap around a family to help strengthen them. And so we developed foster care ministry out of the church that had different levels and wraparound care. So we literally would go in and we would advocate on behalf of foster families in areas that could help strengthen them and make life easier and succeed in what they were doing. And so just in 3 years, we had 5 families foster over 50 children, and I think 18 adoptions take place. And we had 100% retention. So not one family had left, foster care, the program. So that was, it just proved, that this worked.
It worked, yeah.
And so what I later came to find out as we did some research, especially when I was leaving the church, that the organization I'm involved in did some national research, and at the same time was privy to some data points on wraparound care. And we discovered that they tracked 1,000 families over 10 years, and that there was a 95% retention rate of families that were matched with local churches with wraparound care.
Oh, wow.
So we're talking 95%.
That's really high.
Yeah. And so that's when we discovered that this isn't just something that's worked for us. This is evidence-based, that it can work in any community, through any church, no matter where you are, just through a care ministry. So Compicare is a system of care is what it is, and it's virtually the same program that we ran through the church that I pastored. And you have basically you match the church with families that are either within the congregation or outside into community, and you create support teams that help support that family with different things that would take place. So let's just say a foster family has been in court all day. They get home, they're exhausted. Something that would be amazing would be just to have dinner waiting for them that night.
Yeah.
And it psychologically, it does something. Also, tangibly, it does something for that family. It helps them out. And so you begin to create these plans. They're support plans. And so in these plans, the team will look at the family and say, hey, what are some things that we would expect to take place that be needs this month that we can help them out with? So it might be transporting children to soccer practice that month, or it might be, taking meals to them on Wednesday nights so they can get to church. It might be, there's a whole plethora of ideas and then things that they will come across that they discover. One of the greatest needs that foster families have is something we call respite care.
Mm-hmm.
So we define respite as being 4 to 48 hours where a family could get some time off from caring for these children, because it's a 24/7.
Yes.
And with COVID now, this has increased the volume of responsibility there. And we discovered that when families have regular respite built into their schedule, so they know every month, I'm going to get a break for the weekend, I'm going to get that, it helps them foster longer and stronger as a result of that. And so in that family support plan, we begin to execute the idea that, hey, the foster families you're matched with, let's look at ways that we can give them respite care once a month. They get a break. And they're living, they at times are looking forward to that respite. So that's generally what Compicare is a wraparound care system for foster and not just foster families, but we use this system for widows and widowers and post-adoptive families. So basically any vulnerable people group that'd be in your community or within your church, providing an extra level of care for them.
With the foster care, are you looking at, and this is just out of curiosity, are you looking at specifically anybody, or is there certain criteria that you have to go through in order to do it?
To be a foster parent? Yeah, so there's requirements based on where you live, what the government would be age-wise, a bottom age-wise, not a top.
Yes.
And certainly, our objective as a missionary couple would be to encourage churches to recruit from within. We're looking for quality, loving, caring, authentic Christian families to care for these children, because we believe that's the best place where they can receive healing from the trauma they've experienced in their life and be introduced to a larger community. So children that have been in our home in foster care, guess what? They built relationships with people in the church, people who were there, and that will forever make an imprint in their life of learning about what faith in Christ looks like, what the family of God looks like.
Community.
Yeah, and so we believe that that's one of the ultimate places a child can be placed would be in an authentic Christian family.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking there could be people who are older, who may be empty nesters that could possibly
certainly.
help
So
out
we
with
have
that.
in our own community, we have people in our 60s and 70s that are retired.
That's awesome.
That do medical foster and have only started doing this after retirement or later on in life, even adopting still in their 60s and 70s. So yeah, absolutely. People many times will kind of cut themselves out and say, "Oh, I can't do this because of this." But in reality, if you've had the thought, hey, maybe one day I'll foster, today might be that day. Maybe it's time to stop thinking about tomorrow doing it.
Do it today. Yeah. I've heard from many pastors who have retired from the work that you may retire from work, but you never retire from ministry.
Sure.
And so it's something that, no matter what age you are, you could easily get involved in. And so if you're out there and you're thinking, man, I'm a widow or I'm widower, and I'm 60 plus years old, you can still get involved. That's what I kind of wanted to bring out, was that aspect of there's no certain age group that's, there's no top to it.
Yeah.
And so obviously there's a bottom. We don't want a minor necessarily doing that. But, it's something that I think people could easily get involved in, even empty nesters. And so that's something that I've heard from a few people, like, is there a top age or anything like that? And so that's awesome that there's not.
Yeah, and I would encourage people, if they had a desire to foster, doing respite care is probably one of the best ways to kind of entry into that you're taking care of foster kids maybe one weekend a month. You're doing something that's a low level commitment, but you really are making a huge difference in helping to stabilize a family, as well as you're investing in these kids' lives, on a smaller level.
So let's kind of step back a little bit. We're in Putnam County. What are the current needs right now in foster care for Putnam County?
Yeah, so this is a huge struggle taking place right now is the number of foster families. We just are not adequately equipped with the number. So just right now, I just pulled some stats up. So we've got about 105 children that are in licensed foster care. So let me explain a little bit here. So a phone call takes place to the abuse hotline, and then they send that call out. DCF does an investigation. And so if there's a reason for a child to be removed because of abuse, abandonment, or neglect, those would be the three reasons. If they're removed from that home, the first thing that DCF wants to do is to find a family member. Is there a family member that can take this child? That's would be the absolute best case scenario.
Yeah.
If they cannot find a family member, then the second thing they're going to do is look for a non-relative that would be a friend of that child. So it could be a neighbor or a teacher, somebody that's already involved, somebody from the church maybe, it's already involved in that child's life, and they're going to say, hey, would you be willing to take this child? If they can't find a non-relative, then the child's going to be placed in licensed foster care. Now they're going to a stranger's house, and so in our community, we have 105 children that have been removed from their homes that are in licensed foster care. So they virtually have gone to strangers' houses. The bigger problem is that because of the low number of licensed foster homes in our community, 66% of those children that are in licensed foster care from Putnam County are not in Putnam County anymore.
Oh, wow.
So
that's a huge percentage.
Yeah, so they're going to Duval County, Volusia, St. John's. They're scattered all over the state. And so, ideally you want those children to stay here in their school with their friends, going to the church. Maybe they'd been going to church somewhere. You want them to stay in there. Plus, there's a huge hardship if a child leaves the county. Their court case is still in Putnam, so they could be driving an hour or 2 hours to come to court here. Part of the parents' case plans are to do visits with their children. So again, you're talking about hours on the road every week, either with the children, with the birth family, both ways. So there's a lot of hardships when children have to leave the county and go elsewhere. So that would be one of our number one needs presently. If we had, and this is a big number for the size of Putnam County, but if we had 35 new foster families, that would adequately fix our issue here in Putnam County. So now we would have choice for, the best family for that child, and would have, adequately enough families to help manage the number of kids that are removed. So in our county, we have about 250 children that have been removed from their homes, and 105 of those are in licensed foster homes at the moment.
And 35 doesn't seem like a big number, but considering our county, that's
35 really is a huge number.
Yeah.
So we've done classes before where we had maybe 8 families go through the class, and none of them actually get licensed. So if we see a really a sum zero ratio or a negative net gain each year. So we may lose a few families, and we've had a really solid run the last 5 years in Putnam County. But this year we'll have several families that are closing their homes because they've been adopting children, and now their homes, they have so many children that they're not fostering more. So that's a good reason to close.
Yes.
That's not a negative reason. But we don't just need to replace those families. We need to be adding to those numbers. So
Exactly.
And now's a great time if someone wants to become a foster parent because the classes are online. They're relatively done different now, and so you wouldn't be driving to Volusia County or some other county for classes. You could do it right from your home.
Yeah, and I've seen some of the stuff that you've done online, and the classes are good and high quality and all that kind of stuff. So that's awesome. Can you kind of walk us through what are the different levels of Compicare? I know that you talked about respite a little bit, but what are kind of some of the different levels?
Yeah, so I love Compicare, and I love working with volunteers in the church. I mean, it's my passion. That's what I did as a pastor. And so in a church that does traditional Compicare, we have a ministry leader, so somebody that's going to oversee that. That would be normal for any ministry in the church. And then right underneath the ministry leader, we have a group of individuals that are called family advocates. And these are probably some of the most important people in the ministry because they build a really solid relationship with one or two foster families that are either from their church or in the community. And they get a pulse on what's going on in the day of the life of that family and what their team can do to help serve that family. So you have the ministry leader, the family advocate, and then there is a support team. So there may be 5 or 6 volunteers. So the family advocate's kind of like a team leader. And then they have 4 or 5 volunteers that work with them on that team. And that team now puts together this support plan for this family or families each month and identifies, what would be their top needs that they have. And so usually, we encourage them that there's something spiritual you can do for them this month, or something inspirational, let's just say. There's something tangible that you could do this month, or something practical that you do. And then there's something relational that you could do for this family, because foster families become isolated really fast.
Yes.
People don't understand what they're doing. They don't understand the behaviors the kids may have in their home. And so as this support team reaches out and say, what's something we can do this month that's relational for this family? What's something we can do that's tangible for this family or inspirational? Can we just send them a card this month and just say, hey, you're our heroes. Keep it up. You're doing, those things can make the difference between a family's saying, I'm not going to do this anymore. Why did we get into this? And a family saying, you know what, we're not in this alone. There's people that are with us.
Yeah. I mean, and as a parent, I know that for a fact that when other people come alongside you and help you out, even if it's, hey, let me bring over some cookies or something, that breathes life into you. And so I know I can just imagine how difficult it would be to have, especially bringing someone new into the household. That could be, there's a period probably of acclimation where the kid and the family is getting acclimated to it, especially if there's behavioral issues.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that can be really tough. And so that would be immense, just a breath of fresh air to that family. And so what other levels of involvement are there within Compicare?
Yeah, so that's the Compicare care model itself. But churches discover that as they launch Christian foster care ministry, maybe we could give it a generic term there, through the church, whatever they're going to call it. So, many churches don't call it Compicare. They have a name that they've named their ministry, and they use the Compicare model as their model. But so there's, we see churches that will do projects that help to the foster care community at large. And so some of those projects could be diaper drives. We've had local churches here take collections during VBS. We bought school supplies.
We're actually in the middle of doing that too.
So we bought. We're able to do specific school supplies for foster families. So projects are a real easy on-ramp for churches to say, hey, yeah, we're involved in foster care in our community, and this is kind of our on-ramp into it. Projects, and then there's we have a real soft level of Compicare that we do, and so that's where we don't have a ministry leader, but we may only just have an advocate in the church and a small team, and we'll match that church up with a family in the community that's already fostering. And so that's another kind of easy on-ramp for people to begin to use the model. We see churches that will do meals. They may do, so there's some services they may offer that are kind of, they're not built around a team, but they're just separate. Maybe they may have a resource closet or resource room that they have available with, it could be some different supplies in it. It could be clothing. It could be cribs. It could be, so different items. We do first aid kits. We do smoke detectors, things that you don't think about that you're preparing your house for, fire extinguishers. So we do a lot of safety items, that are helpful because a foster family that goes through the class, they front all the costs. And there's sometimes a lot more costs involved than they anticipated. There may be some work they have to do in their house. So we've had churches do projects where they go into a foster parent's house and help them get their home ready to be licensed. And so there's a lot of different project areas that can be done that are really some simple on-ramps for churches to be involved.
That's a lot of stuff. And I didn't even think about that you may even have to alter your home a little bit. Because there are laws and regulations.
Yeah,
for
so
those
I'll tell you,
things.
in our county, one of the issues why we've struggled getting families licensed is because we have incredible families in our county. Like this is the most giving county that I've ever lived in.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that in the 1 year I've been here.
Yeah, and I've watched the volume that people give, and I think to myself, for being a county that is really more towards the bottom end as far as economically. They are rich in other areas that you may step into a county that's high economically, but their richness is not there as far as their hearts. So one of the things I notice is our families that say, hey, we want to sign up for this, we want to do this. But in order for them to do this, they may live in a modular home or a mobile home, and they need new skirting put onto their house. Maybe they have an above ground pool. Well, they're going to have a fence maybe put around that pool. Well, the cost of doing that, now you're talking about, it could be $1,000 or more dollars just to start preparing your home for safety reasons, just so a child's safe when they're there. Could be alarm systems, so there's all these different things. Screens, believe it or not, you have to have screens on all your windows. Well, some of our homes in our community are older homes, and people don't open their windows anymore, and they don't have screens on them. And so, I know a lady who started fostering in our community, and I think 2 homes in the last 18 months. One lays, I think, over 20 screens she had to do, and they had to be custom made because her home is in the historic section of our community.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and they don't make back then they didn't make standard sizes like they make now.
She has, and then a second foster mom, brand new, just started in our community. She's actually widowed. She's, I'm taking a guess, she's in her late 60s, and she's just got her first placement just a few weeks ago. But prior to that, some of the slowdown in getting licensed was she needed screens on her windows, and so she didn't have the money to front to do every window in her house. So, but these are just great opportunities for the body of Christ to step in and say, hey, maybe we've got a men's group that would love to do a project like this, and what are some things we do? Cutting grass. We had a foster family in town, and we matched them up with a local church. And literally, they were spending so much time with their kids that they just couldn't even get out there. And grass was up to their knees. And first thing the church did that was matched with them was went out there and mowed all that down and just maintained that for them. And it's been a huge help for that family not to have to be concerned about some of the maintenance on their home because they're spending a lot of time helping
kids,
helping these kids
exactly
out.
what they need to be doing.
Right, absolutely.
So that's awesome, and that's just I didn't even think of ways like that to even get involved, and my wife and I are even considering how can we get involved.
Sure.
And so this discussion isn't just for you guys. This is also for me and for me and my wife's benefit as well. And so that's something that I didn't even think of is cutting grass. I mean, if you have several foster kids, you want to be able to spend as much time with them as possible. And so that's something that even with my 2 kids, I'm like, man, I got to go cut the grass. But then you think about it, like there are people out there in the community that need that, that need that time with their kids. And foster care is very, very important. So how has foster care been, especially here in Palatka and in Putnam County, how has that been impacted with COVID?
Yeah, so it's not just in the county, but nationally. So I do support training online for foster parents across the nation now. And what we've discovered is, so one of the things that happens, I mentioned earlier, is isolation. So you lay COVID onto a foster family that's maybe already felt isolated. Now they're isolated and their kids are isolated. And so you're talking about the anxiety and stress level begins to increase. Not just that, a foster family, there's a case plan. The objective of foster care is for those children to be reunified with their birth parents. That's the objective. Not to get those kids to be adopted. It is to restore family. Because in our nation, the number one mission field, I believe, right now is the family. Half the children that went to bed last night were unable to say goodnight to their fathers. So we are literally moving into a fatherless generation from that standpoint. Foster families right now are being impacted by COVID because cases are gridlocking even more than they used to because now courts are closed, things are being done online. And so you've got families that just really feel like, is there anybody out there? I'm not hearing from people anymore. I can't go to my church anymore. watching church on TV, even being in a Zoom on the computer is not the same as interacting with people one-on-one. So their kids are isolated, they're isolated, and it is increasing the amount of anxiety and stress. And I think that it's going to impact the system in a couple ways. One way is once we get further on, schools finally open, especially for an extended period of time, we're going to see probably a huge increase in the number of kids that come into care, primarily because in the summertime, you see a lower number of kids coming into care. And the reason is because you have less mandatory reporters that have eyes on kids. So they're not in classrooms. Teachers are mandatory reporters. Teachers aren't calling in reports. Now with COVID, kids aren't going to dentist appointments. They're not going to doctor's appointments. They're not in churches anymore. So all of these people that would be reporters aren't there. So two things are happening, I believe, is you're going to see more kids come into care when school is back in. And the second thing is you got foster parents probably right now that are thinking to themselves, when this case is done, do I want to do this again? Do I want to continue this? Or they may be thinking, I'm not going to wait till this case is done. We may just call in and close our home. Wow. So we could be coming into a situation in the next 6 months where we have less homes and more children, which is going to be.
And a lot of people don't even think about that. That's a fallout of what we're going through right now.
Certainly. So I did one of my pieces I do online is called Foster Conversations, and I just interviewed a young woman who aged out of foster care, and she tells a little of her background story, but she was just saying, that from the abuse that she had in her own family, that we know right now that there's probably higher levels of abuse taking place right now in our community because families that were already abusive families because of alcohol or drugs or anger, things like that. Now you're talking about a higher level because of, people aren't working. I've got a friend who's an iron worker that hasn't worked in months. The unions, there's just not, and so now you've got a whole level of tension happening out there that we're unaware of at this point, but it will open up, when we will see what's going on.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that even in youth ministry I've seen is I've been keeping track of what's going on, and people don't understand that domestic violence is up, suicide is up, all kinds of things is up, and it's as a result of being isolated and being in environments that, especially we shut down our schools, and we did what we had to do, but a lot of these kids are now trapped in the very scenario where school gave them an outlet.
Right, sure.
And so, a lot of people don't understand, when we're having this discussion of reopening schools, why school is still an option, because for some kids, this is something that's real.
Right.
It happens. They're virtual school is a curse to them. For some people it's a blessing, and for some people it's a curse. And so there are kids that all around this country that are in domestic abuse situations, and they can't tell anybody. They don't have anybody to tell. And so, if they're doing a Zoom session, it's easy to hide the bruises. It's easy to hide all those things. And it's like you said, when we do open back up, I completely understand what you're saying. I could see that there's going to probably be some of that as well. And so, because right now everybody's anxiety is up with COVID and all this kind of stuff and everything that's going on. So I can imagine just what a foster care family, especially being away from, I can imagine there's probably even more rules on foster care families than the normal guidelines that we normally go through.
Sure. And normally in our community, we, my wife and I run 2 face-to-face support group meetings. So we usually do one around lunchtime at a local restaurant during the week. People can get out for lunch and meet with other families face-to-face. And, they need that camaraderie with other foster families. And then we usually do a Saturday one at the park where families come out with all their kids, they can interact, play. So we haven't done that since March. And, so even that element of isolation, now they're isolated from even people that can identify with what life is like.
Yeah.
You know, and there's only so much you can get off of a Facebook group feed, or you know, it may be a place to vent, but beyond that, people people need a little
Yeah.
bit more connection than that.
Yeah, and Zoom or FaceTime only goes so far.
Yeah.
As well. Are the family still being able to do their respite time and stuff like that, or is that taken away too?
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, if that's available to them, the reality is that the state doesn't provide respite for them. If they're going to get respite, it's going to be because a church has provided
Yeah.
for them, or a family member or somebody they know
Okay.
has helped them with that. So
I just wanted to see if there was any kind of state mandate that they couldn't be with anybody else or anything like that.
no, I mean, there's issues going on with visits right now, like visits, but no, as far as respite care, if somebody,
Okay.
which is great because Florida has something called the Normalcy Act, and so somebody could watch foster kids up to 72 hours without being licensed or really even having a background check. Beyond that, they'd need to be fingerprinted, and there's a background form they'd have to fill out. So doing respite is actually not as complicated as it was a decade ago, where you actually had to be a licensed foster family to watch somebody else's foster children.
So because of COVID, what is an immediate need that churches right here in our community can help you guys out with?
Yeah, so I think immediate would be helping to raise awareness and recruitment. For the last few years, we've been, or since we left our in 2018, our major focus has been helping churches launch Christian foster care ministry at some kind of level. And but I think now it really is a call to say, hey, what if every church in this community had one family that said they would foster? Whoa, I mean, there's 100 and something churches in this community. I mean, so we really need 35 churches to recruit one quality family. And that would, so I would say, if anything, that's where I'm trailing back to, is to say that we really need to recruit foster families, and then train churches on how to support them. Because really, foster families, if you look at it, are really like local missionaries, is what they are. And they're on this missional movement to care for vulnerable children. They're not in some other country running an orphanage. They're taking care of our children from our county, from our schools. They're our kids.
Yes.
They belong in Putnam County. They don't belong in some other county. And then churches viewing those foster parents as missionaries, commissioning them, whatever, and then saying, we're not going to let you do this alone. We're going to make sure we support you in this endeavor. So I would say, number one, recruitment, and number two, support, helping to give true support to those families to make sure they succeed.
That's awesome. So if someone's interested in getting involved in Compicare, how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so they can, all of our contact information is online at compicarerep.org. That's my personal website. Okay. And then
I'll make sure I put that in the description below.
And then they could always text or call our number, which is 386-385-8170. So that's available for anybody at all times. And so that's a great. Also, if you just had interest, all of our training is being done online now. So we are offering July 30th. It'll be at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But we're doing volunteer training. We're training volunteers that are already actually connected with churches running Compicare. And so if you're interested in just finding out more, you could sit through one of those volunteer training sessions and learn more about foster care and what volunteers do as far as how Compicare works through a church.
Awesome. Thank you so much for doing that. I know my wife and I are going to be praying about how can we get involved, because this is something that we talked about just the other night. I was telling her that I was going to interview you, and she was like, yeah, that's awesome. We need to get involved in that somehow. And so I know we're praying through how to get involved with that. So you'll definitely be hearing from me on
I
that.
appreciate that.
Ted,
Awesome.
thank you so
All
much.
right. Thank you. It's great seeing you.